Hello everyone! Welcome to what will hopefully be the first in a series of VTM videos in which I trace how the VTM clans developed and changed throughout the editions of the game, identify the main themes of each clan, and present my thoughts on how to incorporate these themes into creation of characters. I am interested in how elements of fiction are developed, so I thought it would be fun to go through all the editions of VTM and see how the clans changed between them. For the sake of making this even remotely manageable, I chose to stick to the books that were most relevant for expressing the clans in each edition, so primarily core books and clan books. I also won't be covering bloodlines for now, as they are their own thing and don't necessarily share the themes of the clan they stem from. This isn't quite a review, but I will say it when I think some parts of books don't work. I really love VTM, but let's be honest, there is no use pretending that all writers who worked on it over the years and all of their ideas were good. You probably will disagree in some cases, and that's perfectly fine. I just want to include this because I think not being afraid to say we find parts of media we enjoy bad is a healthier way of engaging with them than constant hype and treating every word written in splat books like the word of God. This is a rather long video, so if you only want to listen to the summary of Brujah themes, absolutely skip to part 2. There will be links to different sections in the description somewhere down below, so listen only to the parts that interest you. Basically, do what you want. I'm not going to tell you what to do, definitely not in a video about Clan Brujah. Part 1. The Evolution of Clan Brujah. When you go back to the first edition of Vampire the Masquerade and read through the description of Clan Brujah, the main things that stand out are rebellion, violence, and chaos, peppered with a bit of idealism. Brujah are described as stubborn, ruthless, highly aggressive, and the most uncontrollable of all clans. They are driven by rage, turn to violence quickly, and have no interest in respecting the rules set by others. They'd much rather spit in the face of the world, either for a reason or just for the sake of it. Their tendency towards rage is expressed through their clan flaw, which they retain in some form throughout editions. Brujah are more prone to frenzy, more volatile. Some of the rage that drives them can be righteous and stemming from their beliefs. Brujah are rebels, and some Brujah want to change the world for the better. But they shouldn't be read as idealistic as such. While there are suggestions in the text that some Brujah are virtuous and idealistic, the text is overall very clear on the fact that it is not the case with all Brujah. They can be drawn to destructive ideologies as easily as to progressive ones, and they might also not have any particular ideals whatsoever. We read that Brujah are united by wanting to overthrow the system, but by nothing else. Not by an idea of what to replace it with, nor by any ideals that drive their behaviors. There is an element of idealism to Brujah, but rage and violence are much more prominent. Brujah are described as having aggressive demeanors, extreme natures, and as capable of pretty senseless violence. Often, they not so much want to change the world as they want to tear it apart. While it isn't stated outright, the text strongly implies that a lot of their rebellious behavior is for show, or at least exaggerated. They dress outrageously, trying to appear more rebellious than their clanmates, and often subject other kindred to what is described as insolent outbursts and fevered ravings. Brujah are kind of pretentious and can be a pain in the ass to talk to. I mean, their quote in the book proclaims that they are the saviors of the earth. Other clans, meanwhile, describe them as nice enough fellas once you get past the crap. The text of first edition states that Camarilla, familiar with their clan curse and resulting volatile natures, is willing to cut Brujah some slack for their behavior. But on the other side of that coin is that while they are more likely to be forgiven for frenzy or insolence than other clans, Brujah are commonly perceived as unfocused and ignorant. They are not taken particularly seriously. There is also a mention that some Brujah are intellectuals. This isn't delved into here, but it's nice to see that this idea for Brujah that got developed later was there from the very start. Second edition came out a year later, and a lot of the clan write-up is the same as in the first edition. We get the same stubborn, violent Brujah, with their pretentious posing and some idealism mixed in. The fact that other kindred often don't treat them seriously at all, and thus cut them some slack, is re-emphasized with a new sentence that things that would earn others final death, in case of Brujah, only get a dismissive comment. Oh, a Brujah. There is also more stress put on individualism of Brujah, who are described as forever searching for the ultimate expression of their individuality. This fits with their outrageous expression and loud demeanor. They rage at the world and want to stand out from it, being unashamedly themselves. This also explains the disorganized nature of the clan. Aggressive and individualistic, Brujah aren't the sort of people who enjoy compromise. They want to do things their way, and they'll do it. Everything else be damned. There is a certain callousness to this Brujah individualism. They value and respect people who can stand on their own feet and go their own way. They don't necessarily have much compassion for those who can't. For example, they often embrace several children without seeking Prince's permission, and then promptly abandon them to survive on their own. If they don't survive, well, there is nothing to suggest that Brujah Sire gives a shit. The first Brujah Clanbook came out soon after 2nd edition core book. It reiterated and emphasized some of what was already stated into core books, and offered a lot more information on the clan. The author didn't work on either of these core books, but I think first Clanbook Brujah is a nice read to get into the clan, even though I think its attempts to write Brujah history into real-world history are generally pretty bad and lacking in creative or interesting approach. But a lot of the clan book is okay, and it includes some cool character concepts for Brujah. The main thread running through the whole clan book is that Brujah are a clan, first and foremost characterized by a contradiction. On one hand, they are violent rebels that we already came to know. They are full of rage, succumb to destructive frenzies, and have a reputation for chaos. They are likely to pick conflicts. Their meetings involve a lot of shouting over each other, and likely at least one frenzy. When they want to punish one of their own, they subject them to extreme physical violence and cruel public humiliation. But on the other hand, Brujah are philosophers and intellectuals. This aspect is associated primarily with Brujah of the past and elders. The idea is that Brujah used to be philosophers and visionaries, but through having their dreams crushed, they turned more and more to violence. This is already expressed on the cover of the clan book. Once they spent their time in the contemplation of the infinite. There is little more beautiful than the work of those with vision. There is little more deadly than a dreamer betrayed. But the intellectual and visionary side of Brujah isn't solely relegated to the past. There are suggestions that this trend is still running through the clan. One of the examples of Brujah characters is a college professor who continues to believe in the inherent value of knowledge and sees freedom to learn as the greatest freedom and the cause that he wants to champion with all of his Brujah passion. There is an attempt to present this contradiction in Brujah as different factions within the clan. Mostly young, aimless, and rebellious Brujah are called iconoclasts. Camarilla elders, who want to build a perfect society and look to the past of the clan for guidance, are called idealists. And finally, there are individualists who fall in between and want to get things done. I think this division is a good framework to think about how Brujah characters can be linked to the Brujah themes of rage, rebellion, idealism, and intellectualism. But personally, I don't think it works well as a faction like division in the setting. It's too set in stone, a bit too simplistic for my taste. I can absolutely believe that Brujah would throw all sorts of labels at each other, probably different ones in different places. But this division is just too neat. The Clanbook also expands on the idea of Brujah as idealists. They envision a different world and try to change the world around them to bring it closer to their ideal. Not all Brujah care for doing what's right, but if there is a clan which, as a clan, values humanity and strives to maintain a certain ethical standing, it is Clan Brujah. Some even say the Brujah embody what conscience remains among the undead. Another important aspect of Brujah emphasized in the Clanbook is their charisma. Brujah are a socially adept clan and know how to charm and influence people. A fact that is, of course, reflected by giving them presence as one of their clan disciplines. This ability to influence others can be used to incite them to follow individual Brujah's cause, but it doesn't have to be. It can also be used for deceit and personal gain. This is very nicely shown by two of the sample characters in the clan book. One is a rapper and true anarch at heart. He wants to take the powerful down and uses his music to spread his message. His charisma is used to champion his ideals. The other character is a fake rapper. He is creatively bankrupt, and his music is just a means to personal gain. While he could appear similar to the first character to a kindred who just met them both, his social skills are used to maintain this pretense. The Clanbook states that the status among Brujah is determined by prestige, which is largely shaped by their charisma and ability to convince others to follow them, and by power, which is derived from age and combat prowess. In this way, all three Brujah clan disciplines are very nicely tied to how Brujah relates to each other, and by extension, and also to the rest of the world, through charisma, helped by presence, or through violence, greatly helped by potence and celerity. The next book I want to talk about is Vampire the Dark Ages, which came out in 1996. It, of course, covers Brujah in a different period, but it contains information that expands and helps to understand their themes. This book expands on the duality of Brujah as scholars and warriors. They value knowledge and embrace thinkers for their intellect. They are visionaries who want to bring about a better, more harmonious and prosperous world. They value both intellect and physical prowess and strive for the perfection of their bodies and minds. But they are also bitter about their defeated position after the fall of their city of Carthage, and they are increasingly embracing warriors, preparing themselves to fight pretty much everyone. While their intellectual bent is more emphasized, these are still the passionate Brujah prone to rage, and they rage against other kindred's unwillingness to rebuild the world according to their personal vision. The fevered ravings mentioned in earlier books are visible here in the quote attributed to the clan. You fools, there are greater things in existence, and they are within your reach. We can change the world if you but stand with us. Wake up before you die. Brujah are a high clan. They are considered noble, and there is a dignity in their intellectual pursuits and quests to perfect themselves. The idea is that they are beginning to change into violent, turbulent clan of the modern night, But, as we have seen and will see, the scholarly trend does not disappear from Clan Brujah. Vampire the Dark Ages encapsulates very well the two contrasting themes of the clan: idealism and intellectualism on one hand, and rage and violence on the other, in a way that can be applied to modern nights as well, or even encapsulated in a single Brujah character. Their knowledge and insight make them see something different is possible. They strive for something more, but their rage pushes them towards aggression and violence. They are frustrated with the world that doesn't care, so they argue and fight with it, expressing their passion through fervent speeches and violence. And so, they are dismissed by others. We see them described by other clans as having failed and following empty dreams. A great quote to describe them is given to Clan Toreador. In their rage, they destroy exactly that which they would find worth preserving. Perhaps accidentally, this quote encapsulates Brujah perfectly, capturing their themes of idealism and rage and the core drama of the clan. In their rage, they destroy that which they would find worth preserving. The core book of a revised edition of VTM came out in 1998 and was created by a different team of writers than those who worked on the first and second edition. Its write-up of Brujah is a mix of ideas that came before. They are described as rebels, with or without a cause. They are among the most violent kindred in the Camarilla. They are disorganized, confrontational, and often at conflict with each other. They have an intellectual and idealistic streak. They are described as warrior poets seeking to create what they envisage as kindred utopia, although they disagree on how that would look like. They are dismissed by other kindred as full of bullshit and producing much noise, but nothing else. They are volatile and passionate clan who wear their emotions on their sleeve. All this has been introduced before, but if we compare the text of revised edition to earlier core books, we see a little less emphasis on rage and rebellion, and a little bit more on idealistic nature and commitment to bringing about change. It is, of course, a subtle change, but the Brujah of first and second edition had a bit more of the rage that drove them to reject and destroy the status quo, possibly with no clear goal in mind, while the Brujah of the revised edition are a bit more passionate about the vision of the world they want to bring about. The Brujah are still violent destroyers, but now more stress is also put on their role as idealists. The individualism of Brujah also gets a prominent place in the write-up, with Brujah described as focused on expressing themselves. The revised edition brought the second Clanbook Brujah, which unfortunately adopts a rather annoying narrator for a large part of the book, where it really doesn't make sense to provide information in character. In character narration can be a good addition if its style is used to express something about a part of the setting, but here the effect is just tiring to read. But there are some interesting things and takes on Brujah hidden in this narration. I don't think it's not worth looking at, but as I said, I found it a pain to read personally. The Clanbook further emphasizes the visionary, scholarly, and idealistic aspects of Brujah. They are the learned clan and have a history of valuing knowledge. They are the people who created libraries and who dedicated themselves to academic pursuits. They can be Socratic advisors to princes, leading them to better understanding. This is again relegated more to the past and elder Brujah, but it is an important theme of the clan and can also be incorporated into younger kindred. The Brujah are also emphasized as agents of change. In contrast to violent rebels without much of a real cause that populated Clan Brujah in earlier editions, revised Clanbook states that they don't just want to destroy the system for the sake of it, but also want to create their own vision of utopia. Again, idealists and visionaries are emphasized over destroyers. Brujah are a clan that passionately searches for something more. In the opening story of the Clanbook, the main character is embraced precisely because his sire sees a desire for something more in him, even if this something isn't quite articulated yet. All Brujah have a desire to change and improve. While the Clanbook states that Brujah can passionately embrace destructive ideologies, and even offers a Confederate scholar as a sample character, a lot of the narration implies that such Brujah aren't very clearly outliers. The clan has a strong, clear streak of idealism. They are passionate and driven by belief that they can affect the world. The clan book offers a new merit for the clan called compassionate, which reflects Brujah's moral character and makes them more likely to pass conscience rolls and thus feel guilt and preserve their humanity. The one common thread of Brujah named by the clan book is the horror of their conscience. The clan book also, in my opinion very rightly, states that with time some Brujah become disillusioned. They still have rage burning inside them, but, frustrated and tired of not seeing their ideals realized, they might settle into the status quo or wander aimlessly. The violent aspect of Brujah is also not gone. They still wield humiliation and physical violence to assert themselves, and they are still likely to unleash their physical prowess on others. The revised clan book also fleshes out an aspect of Brujah that was mentioned before, but not quite in much detail: their connection to the mortals. Previous books stated that Brujah are in touch with mortal world, following its trends and fashions. Revised clan book goes even further, saying that they always embody current zeitgeist. And next to the Toreadors are a clan which represents best the times from which they are drawn. They don't just follow mortal trends and counterculture groups, but maintain ties to mortals, having many contacts among them. Clanbook mentions the idea that kindred stagnate with time and more or less retain the outlook they had when they were embraced, which would imply that the close ties to mortal world only apply to the youngest Brujah. But personally, I don't think this idea makes much sense. Taken to its logical conclusion, it would first of all make kindred society look a little bit cartoonish, and more importantly, it also precludes any significant character development, which isn't fun in a role playing game. But the idea that Brujah are the closest to current mortal world fits other aspects of the clan very well. After all, their turbulent, passionate natures make them likely to understand the passions driving mortals. And their rejection of status quo and striving for something more are exactly the kind of characteristics that would make someone keep up with trends and changes in a search for inspiration for what could be and for opportunities to push the world in a new direction. Revised Edition also had its own version of Dark Ages, called Dark Ages Vampire. In keeping with the rest of the edition, this book puts more emphasis on Brujah's scholarly aspect and desire to change the world in a specific way they envision. They value intellect, study philosophies and religion, seek to perfect themselves, and embrace people who are not only passionate about something, but also capable, especially when it comes to intellectual capabilities. They pursue causes that inspire their hearts. According to this book, each Brujah picks a cause for themselves and fights for it. A child usually leaves the sire when they pick a cause for themselves. Some stick to one cause, some change them quite often. This focus on specific causes is certainly similar to ideals and visions of utopia that drove Brujah in other books, but it reads as just a little bit more limited. It's not a huge difference, but I think this a cause per Brujah approach, emerging from the text of Dark Ages Vampire, feels more artificial than a less singular desire for something more that drives Brujah in a direction that might not be entirely clear even to Brujah themselves, or than a rage that causes them to lash out at the world they reject without a clear goal in mind. Especially that angry rebellion without a cause seems to be mostly lost here, which I think is a shame. The 20th anniversary edition of VTM was published in 2011 as a celebration and love letter to the game wrapped up in 2004. Its write-up of Brujah reiterates the themes introduced in previous editions. They are violent rebels and hooligans. Some follow causes and seek to transform the world, while some just wish to tear it all down. They are individualists who hate being manipulated and are quick to turn to violence against those who seek to subjugate them. They are drawn to embracing people with violent and ungovernable personalities. Other kindred dismiss them for their lack of self discipline and tendency to overreact. V20 again re emphasizes the violent streak of Brujah over their scholarly tendencies or idealism, thus bringing them closer to Brujah of first and second edition. The intellectualism and idealism aren't gone, but they are more in the background. Brujah have an intellectual and philosophical streak, but their history is clearly one of greatness marred by their own fiery natures. And fiery natures are prominent in the write up. The theme that stands out as the most prominent for Brujah in V20 core book is passion. Their emotions are stronger and more volatile than those of other kindred. They feel the flames of passion that once inspired them as mortals, more than any other clan. This inner fire drives their moral indignation and dedication to their ideals, but it also drives them to violence, impulsive actions, and frenzy, working to destroy the things they care about and champion. Lore of the Clans is a V20 supplement. It presents a write-up of Brujah, which, just like in the revised Clanbook, is done in character. In my opinion, it is similarly not a very successful attempt. But it sums up some of the core themes of Brujah, particularly the rage, individualism, desire and the drive to change the world, and the fact that they used to be the learned clan, but that legacy got ruined through their tendency towards violence. A statement that when Brujah rule a kindred city, they do it through their charisma, passion, and through shaping emotions of others, is in my opinion a very nice touch. The idealism of Brujah is also emphasized with a lot, in my opinion a bit too much, attention being paid to dream and legacy of Carthage. I like idealism of Brujah to be emphasized, as it is a nice counterpoint to the rage and tendency towards violence. But having said that, I think Lore of the Clans takes it in a rather simplified and narrow direction of anti-authoritarianism. While previously Brujah were diverse and messy, subscribing to all sorts of ideals, here they are predominantly anti-authoritarian, seeking individual freedom and egalitarianism for all, including mortals. This is in direct contradiction to previous books, which specifically emphasize that Brujah don't necessarily want egalitarianism and don't necessarily give a shit about the position of mortals. Of course, anti-authoritarian Brujah were always present, and I enjoy them very much. But reducing Brujah to anti-authoritarian as a whole takes a lot of much-needed complexity out of the clan. Brujah's relationship to mortals is also flipped on its head. Brujah were previously stated to be closest to mortal world due to their still fiery emotions. Here, they are said to be close to humanity because they want to elevate it to the equality with kindred, and their passions are what separates them from mortals. It is possible to discern from the text that the idea here is that Brujah are very likely to injure mortals in frenzy, and that's where the separation is. But it is presented in a very clumsy manner. The idea that their still intense emotions make Brujah more human and thus closer to mortals gets lost. Lore of the Clans also presents a whole path of enlightenment for Brujah, based on Stoic philosophy and focus on striving to master oneself and defend own moral principles. Now, I think this is a very fine philosophy for some Brujah to follow, tied very nicely to their scholarly aspect, but it doesn't really make sense as a path of enlightenment. It isn't really an alternative morality. It is even stated to be focused on protecting one's humanity. Making it a path of enlightenment is, to put it mildly, a strange choice. V20 also has its own version of Dark Ages book, but its write-up of Brujah is very similar to the one from revised version of Dark Ages. We learn that Brujah are fierce warriors, scholars, and charismatic leaders. They value both physical prowess and intellect. Their idealism is similarly framed through the focus on causes. There is a mention that most Brujah possess at least some academic skill, which again emphasizes their intellect. Their passion and rage are a bit downplayed compared to their scholarly bent and dedication to a cause. And finally, we get to the 5th edition of VTM, published in 2018 and created by yet another team of writers. Its write-up of Brujah is visibly influenced by their simplified view as anti-authoritarian presented in Lore of the Clans, and shares a lot of its flaws. We read that Brujah have always strived for progress in the kindred society. They want to dismantle the establishment, dream of eliminating all injustice, and embrace people sympathetic to the revolution, presumably a left-wing revolution. The idea that their own rage stands in the way of attaining their ideals is better articulated here than in Lore of the Clans, evoking some of the duality of violence and idealism that characterized the Brujah in some of the earlier books. But it's still a fairly narrow write-up. V5 core book offers examples of Brujah who aren't progressives, but given all the stress on eliminating injustice, they look rather out of place, again as outliers. Rage and violence are downplayed, both in writing and in the mechanics. Brujah are still more susceptible to frenzy, but now it is only fury frenzy. They are no longer more likely to frenzy from hunger, which removes an interesting source of drama in the form of tension between many Brujah being idealists, concerned with moral matters, and at the same time being more likely to murder someone when hungry. Violence is downplayed, but rebellion is emphasized as an intrinsic aspect of Brujah. Tendency towards rebellion gets introduced into mechanics through Brujah clan compulsion, which forces them to take a stand against the status quo, make someone change their mind, or do opposite of what is expected of them. I think it attempts to capture some of the argumentative, volatile aspect of Brujah. And as clan compulsions go, this is not the worst one, but it still looks like a childish impulse to be contrary more than like a scary manifestation of their volatile vampiric nature. But of course, the biggest change to Brujah in V5 is that they are no longer in the Camarilla. They have left as a clan, and in keeping with the emphasis on their anti-establishment tendencies, they are on the side of Anarchs. Given that V5 focuses on conflict between Camarilla and Anarchs, assigning most clan to one sect or the other, it makes sense. But the insetting reasons given for this transition and the way in which it was supposed to have happened are pretty contrived. From the point of view of the narrative, this change feels too all-encompassing. Since Brujah were always described as too disorganized to do anything as a clan, and lacked any leadership that could declare their allegiance. And indeed, in V5 Camarilla book, we learn that some Brujah remained in the Camarilla. I am pretty sure that this Brujah would claim that clan's allegiance is still to the Camarilla, and all those Brujah anarchs are anti-tribu or something. Some more complexity of perspectives on what the status of Brujah even is would, in my opinion, be better and more interesting. But having Brujah assigned to Anarchs fits the V5 emphasis on maybe not uniform, but clearly dominant progressive stance of the clan. It also absolutely fits with how V5 designs its settings. The way the setting is said to have evolved from what was before is clumsy, but on its own it makes sense. V5 Camarilla book doesn't offer much more information of Brujah, except for reiterating the division of the clan into philosophical scholarly branch called Helens and a more fiery, passionate branch called Prometheans. We also learn that Brujah are good for a hard, angry fuck, but I'm not going to dwell on that because, understandably, Anarch book has more to offer on Brujah. Although once again it is hidden in not particularly good attempt at in-character writing and scenes. VTM, why do you do this to me? We see reiteration of some of the themes from previous editions. Desire for change, individualism, charisma, association with countercultures, and interest in mortal ideas and movements. Violence and rage get more emphasis here than in the V5 core book, with Brujah being called the clan of rage, retribution, and rebellion. They are said to have a volatile temper, tendency to get destructive, and little compassion for those who failed the clan or betrayed the Anarchs. The Brujah are still implied to be predominantly progressives, but they are more aggressive and violent progressives than those emerging from the V5 core book. Finally, Brujah were always said to be in touch with ideologies developed by mortals, and to sometimes follow them, but V5 and lore of the clans before it put a lot more emphasis on Brujah's involvement with modern day political issues. Brujah were stated to be fighting capitalism and the alt-right, and I'm all for getting rid of both these things once and for all, and I love the fact that VTM has always been about resisting oppression. But I still think so much literal focus on specific issues we're facing today in real world wasn't necessarily the best choice or wasn't done in a most skillful manner here. I don't think tying a vampire clan, or a sect for that matter, to specific left-wing causes offers space for engaging with these causes in a serious and respectful manner. To me, it all comes across as rather shallow and even a bit distasteful. While I'm reading these fragments, I honestly feel like the book, the product, tries to pander to me as a leftist with buzzwords and slogans, but with no real depth to it. Part 2. What are the Brujah about? When people discuss VTM clans, they often talk about clan stereotypes. But if I'm honest, I never found the stereotypes, or the idea of going against them, particularly conducive to creating interesting characters. What helps me are the clan themes, which are never spelled out in the books, but can of course be discerned from the text. When I say themes, I mean simply what the clan is about, its core conflicts and drama, the questions it poses, and its place within the work of fiction that is VTM. Each clan is about something, and I found that engaging with some of what it is about is the best way to come up with compelling characters who will give you a particular clan experience and won't just be a random character who is Brujah or any other clan only through their disciplines and a label. Of course, engaging with clan themes doesn't mean creating only obvious Brujah, although there is nothing wrong with classic and iconic concepts. The themes can also be expressed through unobvious characters, those who don't seem to fit the clan at first, and those who want to reject everything it is and stands for. In fact, the best unobvious characters I've seen were always those who, despite not seeming to fit the clan, still very much spoke to what the clan was about. The themes also have an in-setting significance. Of course, various kindred embrace various people for a variety of reasons. But it makes sense that sires are drawn to children they can relate to in some way, or look for those they deem useful for whatever activities they are themselves engaged in. As such, certain similarity of outlook and personalities within a clan is to be expected. There is, of course, space for diversity and outliers, but even the most unlikely outliers will have to contend with what comes with their vita and with social expectations stemming from what clan they belong to. Engaging with themes doesn't have to come through who the character was before the embrace. It can also be done through how they deal with the realities of existing as a kindred of their clan. So, what are the themes of Clan Brujah? Rage. No matter who your Brujah character is, this is something they cannot escape and have to contend with in some way. Brujah are filled with rage. It comes with their blood and is always simmering under the surface, ready to explode. Brujah are first and foremost about being full of anger and living in such a state without ever being able to escape it. They are about living with consequences of what you've done when driven by rage. The rage can be directed at a specific issue or not. It might be righteous anger or the unfocused rage at the whole world. It can be interpreted as a response to the shock of the embrace and frustration at being stuck as a monster who will inevitably cause harm to others. Characters can lean into this anger, showing it in their demeanor, or even wearing it like an armor against, for example, societal scorn or despair that fills them. They can also try to hide it, control it, and keep it under the surface. What sets off this anger will, of course, vary from character to character, but it will get set off, and character will have to contend with the social and moral consequences. Now, I don't think you have to engage with every single theme I will mention here in every Brujah character, but rage is the one that really will need to be addressed. Some things to think about are: what sets off your character's rage? What is their own attitude to these angry impulses they have inside them? Do they think it's all justified and understandable response, or do they hate the fact that they are so angry? Are they embarrassed by it? Do they try to pretend to others or to themselves that they are not full of anger at all? Did they develop some coping mechanisms to minimize the risk of hurting others? Brujah are full of rage, but that doesn't mean they have to always act angrily. There is nothing wrong with an openly angry character, but it's good to think about how characters feel about the rage that fills them. Why do they feel like that? And how their attitude towards their own anger influences their actions and interactions with others. Volatile passions. This theme is related to rage and is an extension of it. Brujah are overall more volatile. They feel more strongly than other kindred. Everything inside them is more fiery and intense. I like to think about it like this: Brujah have a more volatile beast, and all their impulses are stronger than they are in other kindred. Hence, they are, except for V5, more likely to lose control when feeding. They also care more, whatever they care about. While other kindred become somewhat blasé, Brujah can't and don't stop feeling everything intensely. This doesn't mean that Brujah can't be disillusioned, cynical, or devoid of most or all hope. They absolutely can. But even in this state, their emotions will likely be pretty intense. Now, why Brujah are so intense and volatile is a matter of interpretation. While rage and stronger dark impulses associated with the beast are clearly meant to come from blood, I personally don't like the interpretation that all of their passionate nature is something that develops through Brujah blood as well. The way I read it is that Brujah don't get more passionate, they just, in contrast to other kindred, never get less passionate through embrace and undead existence. While their rage can surpass that of mortals, they don't care more than they did in life. They just continue to feel at exactly the same level, which, if you have a look at us mortals, can be pretty intense. Of course, The intensity of Brujah is not something you want to overdo in roleplay. Brujah aren't full of all the emotions all the time. They absolutely have moments of calm, and when they experience inner turmoil, they absolutely don't have to show it. Just like with rage, they can try to hide the intensity of their emotions. They can express some and suppress others. They can desperately and very intensely want to be much less intense and do whatever they can to appear calm and composed. They can have very high self control or composure. Volatility of Brujah doesn't mean they are bad at staying in control. They just have a much more difficult job to do than other clans because their emotions hit them with so much more strength. Brujah are about existing and coping with intense emotions and passions, and even more than any other clan, they are about the consequences of losing control of yourself when you are a potentially very dangerous monster. Violence. Violence is something that Brujah cannot escape. It is a consequence of failure to control their rage and dark impulses, and this failure happens to all Brujah, over and over again. It is also what they're very well suited to, given their clan disciplines of celerity and potence. The capacity for inflicting violence quickly and decisively is an edge that Brujah have over many other kindred, and consequently, violence is how many of them choose to deal with the world. Like all clans, they have to work with what they've got. Violence is how many Brujah fight for what they care about, protect those they want to protect, and deal with those they oppose. Obviously, not all Brujah would have been violent people in life. But it also follows that if Brujah use violence as a means to achieve their goals, they would often embrace people prone to or skilled at violence, to have appropriate childer to help them in whatever fight they're fighting. The stories of Brujah can be an exploration of people who turn to violence quickly and readily. Some of these people might relish their increased destructive capabilities. Some, even if they were violent in life, might pause to reflect upon seeing the destruction they can cause after the embrace, especially if they lose control over themselves in frenzy. Some might rationalize their use of violence as justified and turn to it more and more. Of course, not all Brujah would have been violent in life, and some will not want to use violence. But even they can't really escape it. It is what they will inflict on others in frenzy. Stories of Brujah can also be the stories of people who caused great harm through negligence, insufficient self discipline, or circumstances they didn't entirely control. Finally, even Brujah who don't want to engage in violence, despise it, and fear it, might find themselves expected to use it. Pressure might come from their clanmates, who are much more comfortable with using their destructive capabilities, or from other kindred. If you're a young Brujah, no matter who you are, people will assume you're a good muscle and might expect or force you to act as one. Even if you're not a good fighter, you are an expendable young kindred and a Brujah. Through your clan disciplines alone, you stand a better chance in a fight than many other kindred, so make yourself useful. Such expectations, and how a character responds to them, can be another way to bring the theme of violence into Brujah characters. Pursuit of knowledge and understanding. If there is a clan that sees an intrinsic value in knowledge, it is Clan Brujah. While other clans seek certain types of knowledge and information for their pragmatic purposes, Brujah are presented as scholars who seek understanding because they see value in being learned. They care about understanding things that do not have practical use and definitely won't make them more influential and powerful. They seek insights that help them grow and envision a different world. They are, after all, the learned clan scholars, philosophers, and thinkers. They may be violent, volatile, and angry, but for many Brujah, underneath it all, there is an understanding or a desire for one. Brujah are about an interplay and tension between violent tendencies on one hand and striving to be something more and understand more on the other. The books generally state that scholarly inclined Brujah are less common now than they used to be. Many younger Brujah don't much care for philosophy, ethics, or history. They don't have the patience nor appreciation for it, which is something that corresponds to the decline in perceived value of humanities in the modern world. But scholarly Brujah are still present, both among elders, who were embraced back when Brujah were more commonly a clan of philosophers, and among younger kindred, some undoubtedly embraced for their appreciation for knowledge by sires to whom it was important. Some younger Brujah might seek those answers and value them more than day-to-day kindred politics, although for many others it might take years before they develop appreciation for what they lack. The rebellious neonates commonly reject any and all guidance from older Brujah, see them as hypocrites and monsters, and want nothing to do with their insights. And obviously, elder Brujah aren't necessarily idealists, and might use an offer of guidance as a means of influencing and controlling the neonates. Of course, Brujah intellectuals still have rage, passion, and a capacity for great violence. Violent tendencies and dedication to the pursuit of knowledge can exist in one Brujah character, and their interplay can create many interesting characters and stories. Idealism. There is a clear streak of idealism running through the clan Brujah throughout the VTM editions. Brujah are about caring about something more than yourself and your personal gain, about struggle to stick to your ideals, about following the deep conviction that some things are just right and some just aren't. All this in the context of living as a vampire, contending with oppression and demands of kindred society, and being very prone to succumbing to violent impulses. Maybe there are no good guys among kindred, but if I was to say which clan was most about trying to remain a good guy, Brujah would be at the top of the list. That, of course, doesn't mean that they don't err from their ideals or don't make choices they themselves despise. But they are the clan most likely to despise own choices when they don't live up to ideals about what is right, and to equally despise rationalizations and excuses. Between their dedication to knowledge and their idealism, Brujah also appear as being about dedication to the truth. Not in the sense of not engaging in subterfuge, but in being true to yourself, seeking to see yourself for what you are and the world for what it is, even if the truth isn't comfortable and self deception would be easier. This is definitely not a quality of all Brujah. Many will lie to themselves, reject understanding, and not have much insight. But it is a mini theme that I think can also spark some very interesting Brujah characters. Brujah believe in something more. They are the ones likely to actually deeply care about their humanity, morality, and mortals. They are the ones most likely to dedicate themselves to trying to create something better out of the kindred society. The ideals they hold don't have to be the same. Some might not even be able to articulate what exactly they believe in. Some might be just vaguely searching for something more to give meaning and direction to their existence. Brujah idealism intersects very nicely with their rage. Seeing their ideals disregarded or mocked might provoke their anger, on occasion even to the point of frenzy. And frenzy, in turn, can cause Brujah to commit acts that stand in opposition to their ideals. Their rage can be sparked by their idealism, but it is also in conflict with it, as a force driving them to destructiveness and indiscriminate violence. Incorporating idealism into Brujah characters can take different forms. They can be people who refuse to give up their ideals and stick to them stubbornly, holding kindred society in contempt. They can be passionate advocates for what they believe is right, trying to sway others to their cause. They can be people who didn't care about much in life, but having witnessed firsthand the inhuman aspects of kindred society, finally felt outraged and developed principles. They can also already be partially or fully broken by the kindred existence. They might still believe in their ideals, but just not have any more strength to do anything about it, despite feeling shame and distaste with themselves. They might lie to themselves that they haven't entirely abandoned their beliefs and will get to realizing them once they have more influence, or once the moment is better. They can also be people who were broken too many times to even care anymore. Some might feel bitter and empty. Others might seek refuge from their despair in indiscriminate violence, driven by rage they're so prone to. Brujah are not only about trying to stick to your ideals, but also about what happens to people who over and over again see their ideals spat upon, can't do anything meaningful to realize them, and are forced to act against them. Rebellion and desire for change. Brujah aren't comfortable with accepting the world as it is. They reject it and oppose it with the full strength of their volatile emotions. They want to destroy the status quo, reject authority of others, create something different. VTM as a whole has always been a game about living under oppression and resisting it. But the theme of resisting is the most pronounced in Clan Brujah. They are the ones who can't stand how things are in the kindred society and will lash out against it. This, of course, doesn't mean that all the Brujah are fighting for a just cause. Rejecting oppressive authority doesn't necessarily mean that you want to make the world better. It might also mean that you can't stand others telling you what to do, but don't give a shit about anything beyond that. Of course, some Brujah will have an idea of what kind of a change they would like to bring. For some, it will be rooted in their idealism. Others will draw on philosophy, history, and political theory. But many will just feel unhappy with how things are now. They will demonstrate it through demeanor, words, and actions. But there won't be a cause or a follow up to their rebellion. For some Brujah, rebellion is the beginning and the end. Some want to change the world, but some just want to reject it. But all the rebellious Brujah have to contend with the fact that opposing and changing the world isn't easy. It particularly isn't easy in the kindred society with blood bonds and an array of powerful disciplines at the disposal of those you're opposing. Brujah aren't about a hopeful rebellion that brings about desired change. They are about doing the best you can to resist the world that is about to crush you. About standing up for yourself and others in a situation where most likely you don't stand a chance of winning. If Brujah are about rebellion, it follows that they are also about rebellion stifled and defanged. Stories of Brujah can be the stories of people who tried many times and still failed to bring about any change, whose rebellion got co opted by those in power, or who became discouraged and broken. You can absolutely make full of conviction rebellious Brujah doing the best they can to stand up for a cause close to their heart. But the theme of rebellion also sparks other questions, which can become a basis for a character. What are the different motivations for rebelling? How long can one sustain a rebellion before it all becomes empty? What is the meaning of rebellion if you can't win? What are the different ways the rebels fail? Individualism and self expression. Brujah individualism is linked to the theme of rebellion, but I chose to make it a separate point here, as it got quite a lot of emphasis in some VTM books. Brujah are about trying to remain true to yourself and do what you want in the face of society that wants to crush you and make you conform. This is, of course, also one of the general core themes of VTM, but it is most clearly expressed through Clan Brujah. They are about expressing your truth and identity when it would be easier to hide certain things and act appropriately. Brujah challenge what is expected of them and follow their own hearts. But the way they do it is a form of rebellion. They don't simply ignore the society to focus on what they want. They often want to show others how little they care for expectations and for what is appropriate. Brujah individualism is a statement of their rebellion and their own truth. It is a challenge to others. It is also what often drives conflicts between them, as each Brujah wants to do things their own way and won't compromise on their truth. Brujah individualism can also be marked by pretense. Their self expression and rejection of what is appropriate can be absolutely genuine, but it can also be partially or even entirely for show. Seeking to shock and appall the society might be an expression of a frustration with not being able to bring about any meaningful change. It might be a coping mechanism for those who struggle with oppression and their own rage filled destructive nature. It might be all fun and games for those who still haven't realized the horror of their new existence, or for those who already went through horror and escaped it by gleefully embracing their violent and destructive natures. It might also be a way to gain support and following of other kindred, especially the young ones who are struggling to adjust to an oppressive hierarchy. Charisma. There is no denying that Brujah can be very charismatic. Their natural ability to sway and inspire emotions is, next to violence, among the main methods of engaging with the world, working towards their goals, and establishing status for themselves within kindred society. The clan is gifted with presence, which makes ensuring the support and following of others much easier for them than it would have been in life. Brujah are about inspiring others and influencing their emotions through the sheer force of your personality, which naturally means that they are also about responsibility and consequences that come with such influence, and about what can be achieved through inspiration and passion in a rigid, oppressive world. Brujah charisma can take different forms and intersect with their other themes in different ways. They can be inspiring leaders, stirring up passions and motivating others to follow them in their cause. But their charm can manifest in completely different ways as well. They can be teachers and mentors who inspire trust and love for learning. Naturally likable people whose genuine self expression appeals to others, but who don't necessarily try to do much with it. Violent and unnerving people who nevertheless have certain magnetism. People applying their natural and supernatural charm to influence others for their own gain. For some Brujah, presence might be an extension of their natural charm and magnetism. For others, it will be a newly found ability that they might either largely ignore or slowly begin to develop. Regardless, the ethics of using presence is something many Brujah characters should consider, particularly the characters with a more idealistic or progressive bent. Presence isn't a nice discipline, and some Brujah definitely won't feel comfortable with supernaturally manipulating the emotions of others to make them adore them. That doesn't mean they won't use it under certain circumstances. But while some Brujah will certainly use presence without giving it much thought, for many others it can be a source of inner conflict and drama. It's just a Brujah. There is no denying that Brujah can be very charismatic, but there is also no denying that they can be very annoying. They care a lot and don't shut up about the things they care about. They get angry over the littlest things and don't shut up about it either. They take an issue with so many things. They can't compromise or accept certain necessities, like civilized kindred. The more you interact with them, the more tiresome they become. Brujah are expected to be loud, impatient, and irrational. Everybody knows they easily get angry and can't really control themselves. As such, they are cut some slack on account of their volatile natures. While an angry outburst to a superior or frenzy at an inappropriate moment might land a kindred of a different clan in a lot of trouble, Brujah might be forgiven more easily on account of being just a Brujah. Of course, They rage and cannot control themselves. It's just how they are. Obviously, there are limits to this, and a Bruja who doesn't make any effort to behave might find that patience granted to them on account of their clan has run out. But nobody really expects Bruja to act like civilized kindred. But of course, there is a downside to this tolerance, and it is that Bruja have to work much harder to be taken seriously. Serious kindred don't have time for their emotionality. So while Bruja are expected to rave angrily about many things, they are not likely to be listened to. Because they are so passionate and ultimately tiresome, they are easily dismissed as irrational radicals. After all, if a usually very controlled and pragmatic Tremere is passionately arguing for something, it must be a big deal. If a Bruja is passionately arguing for something, it's more of the same, and there's no point wasting time on it. Even the Bruja who control themselves well will be dismissed more easily on account of being Bruja when they have a point to make. This, of course, reflects the real world dismissal of people who passionately and persistently advocate for often very noble causes, as too emotional on one hand, and as radicals and extremists on the other. Bruja are about difficulties of trying to advocate for something when the world simply doesn't care. They are about having the very fact that you care and your passion used against you, about trying to persevere regardless, and about the effect this has on people. Part 3. Creating Bruja characters. I will now give few examples of how I incorporate these themes into Bruja characters, or how I have seen it done well. Remember that you don't have to include all of these themes in every Bruja character. I generally like to start with one or two in my basic concept and see what else fits. My first example of a Bruja character is Richard, played by my friend in my very first game of VTM. Richard was built around the themes of violence, search for understanding, and growing idealism. Violence was a prominent theme in his mortal life and at the start of the Chronicle. He was a member of a motorcycle gang and not a pleasant individual at all. Having lived in an extremely violent and right wing environment, he soaked up such an outlook and lived according to it. Violence was how he dealt with problems by default. But from the very start, there was also not quite a search, but a longing for something more built into Richard. The idea for the character was that when faced with previously unimaginable horrors of the vampire world, and when mentored by a Bruja elder who took him under his wing, Richard would begin to grow and act on his desire to be and understand more. He was a violent character who, when faced with an even greater violence and horror, turned more and more into an idealist, searching for understanding and meaning. Of course, that change didn't mean Richard abandoned violence. He continued to use it to deal with many problems throughout the game, but what he used it for changed. When we started the Chronicle, he was definitely the worst person in our coterie. By the end, he was the best and the most caring of us. While idealism wasn't his trait at the start, potential for it was built into him at character creation. Richard wasn't yet aware of it, but it was present and increasingly influenced his actions. The theme later became more prominent in Richard than violence, and his journey was really a great thing to witness. I think Richard, apart from being a really interesting character, is also a great example of how some themes can be built into the character only as a seed that might grow during the Chronicle, and of how the way in which character interacts with the themes of the clan can change and evolve as the story unfolds. Another example I have is Oksana, a Bruja I would like to use one day. Creating her, I started with the idea to create a young Bruja engaging primarily with the theme of pursuit of knowledge and understanding. I made Oksana an anthropology graduate who traveled a lot to understand people and cultures of the world the best she could. I decided she would be intelligent, curious, and have a natural charm and ease of establishing connections with people. This already brought in some of the Brujah charisma. I also decided that I didn't want her to advocate for any cause or have any strong convictions. I wanted her to be an overall decent person, but not an idealist striving to change the world. She was to be mostly focused on understanding and experiencing it. My idea was that her embrace stranded her in one place, depriving her of an important part of how she explored and learned the world. She wasn't happy about it and isolated herself, focusing on reading as much as she could. She could still be charming, but she often chose not to talk to people, struggling to come to terms with what happened to her. On some level, she wanted to explore her new condition, but she hasn't realized it yet. At the start, I wanted her to still try to cling to what was left of her old pursuits and struggle with frustration and grief. Of course, after her embrace, she also had to deal with Brujah rage. Thinking about Oksana, I decided that she was embarrassed and scared of the violent emotion now raging inside her. She was always an easygoing and relaxed person, so after the embrace, she struggled with suddenly being so easily provoked and capable of causing violence. I figured she would put a lot of pressure on herself to keep her Brujah rage in check and strive to appear balanced and in control. She would feel a lot of guilt and shame whenever she failed to do so. But on an everyday basis, she would be well suited to acting as a voice of reason. I also anticipate that if I play Oksana, she might clash pretty quickly with the dismissal Brujas so often experience, and that her arguing for something reasonable, if she was to show any anger or passion, might be construed as Bruja emotionality, which would push her to try even harder to always appear very calm. Yet another example of a Bruja character is Damian, a Sabbat NPC I created for my chronicle. He was supposed to be an antagonist, and I wanted him to have an element of violence. But I like every character in my games to be a proper person, so I started thinking about how to flesh him out. I decided that he came to violence through rebellion and rage, both of which characterized him in his mortal life and intensified when he became a Bruja. I decided that in life he hung out a lot with anarchists and activists, unafraid to engage in direct action, but driven more by general anger at the world than by any positive emotions or ideals. He wasn't at peace with himself and felt very lost. He also didn't get a chance for his views to mature because he got embraced. I wanted him to be a runaway from Camarilla, so decided that his sire chose him for his looking for a fight demeanor and angry courage, to use him as basically an extra expendable muscle for the Camarilla. My idea was that pressure and instrumental treatment were too much for Damian. He struggled to control his rage and hated being used as a pawn. He wanted to rebel against his sire, who for a time kept him in check through blood bond manipulation and physical violence. But in the end, his rebellion and rage drove him to seek help from Sabbat, the people who appeared to want his sire dead as much as he did on some deep level. At first, he didn't have it easy in Sabbat, being subject to even more traumatic violence. But I wanted him to end up as comfortable with both violence and Sabbat. At this point, it seemed natural that as his humanity declined and his packmates helped him kill his sire, unrestrained violence became a solace for him. Pressure was gone. He stopped feeling the need to rebel, which always stemmed from not being at peace with himself. And he became comfortable with a violent and angry version of himself, because that was the version that was strongest and felt free. Of course, Damian still carried in himself pain and memories of humiliation, but indulging in violence was what helped him escape them, and he came to love it and seek it. For the purposes of this video, I also decided to develop one more character called Marika. The idea behind this character is to engage with the Brujah theme of rebellion by creating a Brujah who is a conformist but tries to appear rebellious to fit in. Marika is someone who always needed to be accepted and praised to an unhealthy level. I see her as being embraced by accident, her sire killing her when feeding, and deciding to make her a kindred because they felt bad. Marika didn't fit in with some of the more rebellious, idealistic, and intellectual Brujah. She was a young woman who was still learning her place in the world and who never thought very deeply about societal or philosophical issues. Marika knew she wasn't really picked by her sire, and this knowledge only fueled her need to be accepted by them and by the rest of the clan. The need was also fueled by her interactions with other kindred, who expected her to be just another Brujah and construed any more emotional behavior as a sign that she was. And she was quite emotional as a young person thrown into a very difficult kindred existence. She devised a style for herself that would signal her rebelliousness and individuality, hoping for appreciation from her sire and other Brujah. She takes sometimes reckless actions to show how much of a rebel she is and to be recognized for it. There is a desperation to be accepted and praised, fueling everything she does. She struggles a lot, both with her place in the world and with her turbulent emotions. She pretends to herself that she genuinely is and wants to be a rebel, and she responds to accusations of being fake with all the force of excessive Brujah rage. And the accusations obviously come, since more experienced kindred aren't fooled by her posturing. They see it for what it is, empty and devoid of any real substance. Marika engages with Brujah themes of rebellion and truth by being a character who isn't characterized by either of them, but desperately tries to fit in with people who are, because everyone else assumes she can't be anything else anyway. She is conformist, fake, very lost, and in emotional pain, struggling with the rage burning within her, directed at everyone who would reject her or question her authenticity. Her journey could be about her learning to follow her own path. For example, through rebelling against the expectation of rebellion and leaning into the themes of individualism and truth as well, but this time as things she has learned. But Marika's story could also follow a darker path of her becoming more and more obsessed with getting love and acceptance, her emotions and actions becoming more toxic, and her rage less controllable and more destructive. Finally, I want to give an example of incorporating Brujah themes in elder characters. One thing that for me distinguishes Brujah elders from other elders is that they are still capable of feeling and caring as deeply and intensely as they did in life. That doesn't mean they have high humanity, they might be pretty far gone, but if something moves them, it moves them with the intensity experienced by mortals. It doesn't mean passions have to be their main theme, but it is something worth keeping in mind. I decided to create a Brujah elder called Elena for the purpose of this video. I like to start with who the character was in their mortal life, so I made her a noblewoman and a poet, writing satirical and rather spicy pieces that mocked the life at the royal court and social order, its pretense and its hypocrisy. That already brings in the themes of charisma and rebellion that will be prominent in defining Elena. Now, if I was preparing her for a specific chronicle, I would make sure to situate her firmly in the history of the place where she lived. I generally think having elders reflect the history of the place where the chronicle is set is a great way to give more depth to its setting. For the purposes of this video, I will leave it somewhat open. Elena eventually crossed the line at the time when any dissent and stirring up of trouble were not tolerated, and she was sentenced to death. Of course, her sire intervened, and instead of dying, she became a kindred. But I decided that her mortal experience taught Elena the dangers of crossing the line. She was clever enough to draw conclusions from it, and while her rebellious nature and newfound Brujah rage would push her to come close to crossing the line many times, she would be careful not to cross it too much. I think this is an important part of her characterization, as the ability to draw this conclusion and learn how to balance her rebellious drive with survival was one of the things that differentiated Elena from many Brujah who simply didn't survive long enough to become elders. Fast forward few centuries. Elena is now an elder in her city. She still feels the passion that drove her rebelliousness and desire to stir things up in society as strongly as ever before. I think elders are generally well defined for their standing and relationships to other elders. Of course, I won't develop the whole city here, but I think Elena would be someone who, thanks to her wit and intelligence, would be able to offer very good advice to the prince, but being her passionate, rebellious self, she would always push for a bit more than is reasonable. I see her as an elder who chooses to exist on thin ice. She has a way with words and uses it to point out inappropriate, uncomfortable truths, which means other elders watch her with certain distaste. But she is, after all, still just a Brujah, so is tolerated, especially since she usually knows when to stop. Of course, a political rival could seek to undermine her by attempting to stir up her passion and rage to cause her to definitely cross the line. Elena is on the lookout for it, and while she lets her rage show through, she is very focused on avoiding frenzy. I want Elena to be someone who, to a young, still clueless kindred, seems powerful, influential, and benevolent. She takes interest in neonates, particularly those who stand out from the crowd and get themselves in trouble. She genuinely wants to help them prosper, but of course, she's an elder who lost some humanity over the centuries, and she won't hesitate to sacrifice them for goals she is more passionate about. She particularly likes the neonates of her clan, who are rebellious themselves, don't fall for her charm, and even tell her to go fuck off, as long as they do it in private. She severely punishes any serious disrespect in public. After all, learning how far you can go is an important lesson for every neonate. So, Elena's main Brujah themes are her charisma, passion, rebellion, and slightly dismissive treatment she gets on account of her clan. Elena's charisma gained her some support, especially among younger kindred and lower clans. This, of course, strengthens her position, balancing out expressions of rebellion. Passion both makes her closer to her followers and distances her from other elders. She is cut some slack on account of being a typically emotional Brujah, but although she might seem powerful and influential to a young neonate, a more careful observer will see that she is fairly isolated and disliked among elders for her refusal to behave according to the rules. This is just few examples of how you can lean into different Brujah themes and make different characters who will still keep some of what constitutes the core of what the clan is about. You can choose to tailor your choices to the themes that are emphasized in the edition you're playing, or mix and match. I personally like to mix and match. In any case, I really hope this video was interesting and gave you some inspiration for Brujah characters. Regardless, I will probably do more clan videos like this, because I have the password to this channel, and much like a Brujah, I will do whatever the hell I want.